Keep Torah, but be filled. Keep the feast days, but be filled. Keep Shabbat, but be filled. This is about the indwelling, not the external outfit. Acts chapter number 19. I've told y'all over and over. If you have not read and studied the book of Acts, stay out of Paul's letters because you're not going to understand Paul's letters. You're not going to understand geography. You're not going to understand who he's talking to, the people. You're not going to understand the makeup of these congregations. You're not going to understand any of that if you have not had an understanding of Acts through the instructions and the wisdom of the Ruach. You're not going to be able to understand, and you will misinterpret his letters. And this is what's going on with people today that don't like Paul. Because one, they ain't born again. They don't have the Ruach. Okay, so let's read here. Verse number 1 through 7. And it happened that while Apollos, would say, Elder?
Acts 19.
Acts 19.
Okay. All right. You said Ephesians at first.
Oh, yeah. I always look at Ephesus on this thing and say Ephesians. Acts 19. Acts 19, 1 through 7. This is Paul in Ephesus. Okay. So we already see here the backdrop. Paul is in Ephesus. Henceforth is the reason why we have a letter to the Ephesian congregation, because Paul visited and established that congregation before writing the letters. So therefore, Paul does not have to go into all this full, all-out dissertation about what he's talking about, because he's talked to the people face to face. So he can speak in partial speech and partial conversation, and they know what he's talking about. The issue is we don't know what he's talking about, because again, if we haven't studied this, we haven't thoroughly done research and background and understand the geography and the makeup of those assemblies, then we're going to be lost. All right. But look what it says. And it happened that while Apollos was at Corinth, okay, so Apollos is from Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria, Egypt was the Harvard, Yale, and Cornell of the day, where many well-known scholars were from. So Apollos was very educated, highly educated, probably even the top of his class. Okay, so Apollos was in Corinth. Henceforth, reason why we got a letter written to the Corinthians. Why? Because you got Ephesus, and then you also got Corinth. All right. Paul passed through the inland country and came to Ephesus. There he found some disciples. And he said to them, did you receive the Ruach when you believed? I want y'all to listen. I want y'all to pay attention to this. Paul approaches these disciples. He knew that they were followers of the way, but Paul didn't just stop it because they were disciples. I want y'all to pay attention. Pay attention to this very careful. Paul wasn't flattered by the fact that they had on garments like Israelites, if they did, if they had head wraps on, if they had fringes on, if they had tzitzis on. Paul didn't care if they carried the Sefer Bible, the King James Bible, the NIV, ESV. It didn't matter. Paul wanted to know. Y'all say y'all disciples? through my experience, it's a whole lot of people running around here talking about their disciples. But I need to make sure what type of disciple you are. Ooh-wee. Look at this. Paul says, have you received the Ruach? See, he's trying their spirits. We always talk about this. We love to throw out, you gotta try the spirit by the spirit. You gotta try to, we heard that coming up in the Christian church. We even say it now. Paul asked them one simple question, because Paul trying to find out if I can trust you. Because if you ain't got the Ruach, I can't trust you. I can't fellowship with you. Because you say you're a disciple, but you might be a disciple of the devil, parading around like a disciple of Christ. I need to make sure that when we end the service, that while you praying for me, you actually praying and not praying on me. I need to make sure that you don't stab me in the back, all while saying you love me. I need to make sure that when you say you praying for me, you actually praying for me. I need to make sure that I don't waste time, because I don't have time to waste. I'm on a mission called Preach the Gospel that is going to one day cause me to be killed. So I don't have time to even make fellowship or friendship with you if you're not born again. I need to make sure that if we're in a situation, that wisdom will give you the way. So Paul says, did you receive the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, when you believe? Obviously, there are people that have confessed in the assembly that they believe in Mashiach, but they ain't have the Holy Spirit. So at some point, Paul is making sure you fooled me one time, you're not going to fool me again. I was immature. I was happy and excited to be amongst my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh. But through time, experience, and wisdom, and through the teaching of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, I got to make sure that I don't open myself up to somebody or something that's I'm going to regret later. So he says, have you received the Holy Spirit when you believe? And they said no. Let me tell y'all something. You know what I love about this? I love that these disciples displayed a level of integrity and character. These disciples didn't pretend to be something and more advanced and further along than they are. You know the thing that trips me out about Israelites today? You can take an Israelite that's awakened for 3 months, and he act like he's been awakened for 30 years. He has to get around other Israelites and try to talk the lingo and try to do all this stuff to prove that. And many of us who've been in this walk long enough to know, we can identify, especially those that are born again, we identify and recognize that you're not further along as you say you are. It's certain things and certain ways that one becomes resolved in. These disciples were truthful. No. And then they tell Paul, we have not even heard that there is a Holy Spirit. A part of my frustration and a part of my concern with the awakening is that people are awakening and they're not awakening to being filled with the Holy Spirit. They're being awakened to everything but that. And the reason why I don't blame them, I blame many of these teachers that have never taught or have never introduced the Ruach to them. But how can you, on the other end, introduce when you don't have it? And this is the reason why I'm saying to you all tonight, as we read in Daniel, you're going to awake to something. And that thing that you awaken to is going to be the determining factor of where you spend eternity. I pray with everything in me that we examine ourselves, that we look at and we consider the message on tonight, that we dig down in the depths of our being and cry out to the Most High and ask the Most High to eradicate any and everything that is unlike Him and to open our souls and our hearts to the Ruach HaKodesh and ask the Most High to fill us and deposit in us the power and make residence, permanent residence of His set apart spirit, not for our own pleasure, but for His glory, for His name's sake. And we have to welcome the Ruach. And we have to feast with the Ruach. We have to make it a lifestyle. Some of us probably ain't fasting, I don't know how long. Some of us probably ain't prayed. And I'm talking about prayer. I'm not talking about drive-bys, getting in your car praying on the way to work, praying whenever things going bad. No, I'm talking about a lifestyle of prayer and a lifestyle of worship. And you can tell every week at Shabbat who has a lifestyle of worship. You cannot fake worship. You cannot fake the lifestyle of prayer. You're only fooling yourselves. Verse number 3. And they said, verse number 2. No, we have not even heard that there is a Holy Spirit. And he said, listen what Shaul said. He said, well, you ain't never heard of the Ruach? Ain't nobody ever teach you the Ruach? Ain't nobody know. So you got baptized? He said, hold on. He said, so into what then were you baptized? So what were you baptized into? Which also tells us that Paul knows there's a distinction in types of baptisms. So Paul, like, okay, well, if you never heard of the Ruach, well, what baptisms you were baptized into, so I know who your teachers are. See, in that you had all types of forms of different teachers and sects and groups that had their own form of baptisms. Into what baptism were you baptized into? Huh? Was it the Sakari? Was it the Zealots? Was it the Pharisee? Was it the Sadducee? Who? I need to know who your teachers are. And they said, we were baptized into John's baptism. Oh, okay. So Paul said, all right, okay. I know John was the Mashiach's cousin, and he was a righteous man. Okay, cool, bet. All right. And Paul says, listen, beloved, John baptized with the baptism of repentance. His baptism, telling the people to believe in the one who was to come after him, that is Yeshua. So John's baptism was to prepare you for the Mashiach's baptism. John's baptism was not to point you to Torah. John's baptism was to point you to Mashiach, to prepare yourself to be able to receive the baptism of the Ruach, the fire that Jeremiah is talking about that was shut up in his bones, that fire that when he didn't want to speak, that opened his mouth and made him deliver the message of repentance. That fire is what John was pointing you to, not for you to awaken to who you are, just to remain stuck in a position of no authority and power. That was not the purpose of John's baptism. John's baptism was to prepare you. If he is the one to prepare the way of the Mashiach, then his baptism is the same thing that prepares you for the coming of Mashiach. So therefore, you could be endowed with the power that the Mashiach was promised to come. But if we don't even understand the simplicities of John's mission, then we fail. So these disciples were John's disciples. Yeah, they understood repentance. They lived a righteous lifestyle as Israelites anyway. But even though they lived a lifestyle after the Torah, they still had to repent. So the Torah itself did not bring righteousness to them. They still had to repent and be baptized, so therefore they can receive the Mashiach and receive the Ruach. Yeah, keep Torah, but be filled. Keep the feast days, but be filled. Keep Shabbat, but be filled. This is about the indwelling, not the external outfit. Be filled. Don't look like it, but empty in the inside. Don't have this beautiful outer appearance of a bottle that's all beautiful and all this other stuff that look like the water is refreshing, but the pH is in it is terrible. Or you can have a basic outside bottle, but the pH is in it make the water so refreshing in the inside. He says John's baptism was to point you to Mashiach. So now Paul is teaching them, because since they never heard of the Ruach, Paul has to give them a short dissertation so that way to prepare them to receive. This is the wisdom of the teacher. The wisdom that Paul is displaying is not the wisdom of the Pharisees. It's the wisdom of the Ruach, that Paul is patient with them. We just read it in Daniel 12. Paul is being patient with them. He says, okay, I understand. Okay, now I understand. You never heard of it before, but I have patience. My mission is to make sure that you hear the gospel. My mission is to make sure that you become born again. My mission is to make sure that you just didn't go down a devil and come up a wet devil. My mission is to make sure that you be filled and thirst never again.